Same old man. Here's Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger potion.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Oh, welcome to episode 616 for December. I'm already thinking about January. December 22nd, 2024. I'm JD Durant.
I'm Brendan Cassidy. I was about to say I'm ready for Christmas. Apparently I missed it.
Yeah, look,
I slept through it.
Clearly, I'm thinking about moving into the new year. I'm thinking about the InSession Film Awards that are on the horizon.
Which do take place in January, so I know where your head's at.
Yeah, exactly. So for whatever reason, I had January on the brain there for a brief moment. But yes, we have a really fun show in store. Thanks for being here. We hope everyone is getting ready for their fun celebrations this holiday season, however you celebrate. We hope everyone has a great time. I know my kids are very, very excited. Santa is going to reward them quite well this year.
They were good boys? They were not on the naughty list?
Good boys. They were not on the naughty list.
Good for them.
They were very good boys, and I'm excited to have that experience later on in the week. So we hope everyone is having a great time this holiday season. Mm-hmm. So as we veer to the end of the year, again, January is when the InSession Film Awards are happening.
That was a nice shameless plug for our award show.
And to be more specific, that is happening on episode 619. So we are just a few weeks out from the InSession Film Awards. Again, that will be episode 619. There are two parts to it, right? Part one is the awards portion. That is when we go through all of the categories. Yep. That's best director and cinematography and animated film and score, and everything that comes with the categories. And then part two will be our top 10 show, where we go through our top 10 movies of the year. So that'll be a really fun time. Make sure you get that on your calendar. Subscribe to the show, whether it be on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, however you listen. Make sure you subscribe, because that's going to be a show you want to tune in for as we celebrate the year that is 2024 in film. Episode 618. So in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be doing our best scenes of 2024. That's going to be a lot of fun too.
Which is
a lot
always
of scenes to think about.
Always a harder exercise than
in some
just
ways
doing,
it is.
Yeah, than just doing our basic awards in top 10. It's harder to pick the best scenes of the year.
That is a really challenging exercise, and as always, many great scenes to choose from. But look forward to getting into that. So that is in 2 weeks' time, episode 618. So that means that this week and next week, we have catch up. We have homework to talk about. And we have a lot of movies that we're going to go through. And on this episode, we have, 9 episodes or 9 films that we're going to go through.
Yeah, so we're going to be doing this gauntlet style. We may have to spend no more than like 10 minutes on each of these movies.
We're going to get through this kind of quickly.
We really have to practice our brevity here.
Yes, and next week will be the same. We're going to get through some rather big films next week, especially.
We may have even more than like 8 to talk about. Yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Big time. Yeah. Big time. So I am really looking forward to getting into these films. Real quick, though, before we do, let's quickly talk about the parade and how it is shaping up.
Great time.
This week, it's interesting because, we jokingly call this segment is the parade on or off. Mm-hmm. And the irony of this week is it's kind of both. The parade is on and it's also canceled. So, and here's what we mean by that. So Sonic the Hedgehog 3 does gangbusters. It does very, very well. It opens with $62 million domestically. It hasn't really opened up too much worldwide quite yet, but it wins the box office in a landslide. It wasn't even close, right? So Sonic the Hedgehog 3 comes in with $62 million. It has an 85% on Rotten Tomatoes. I wasn't necessarily planning on catching up with this film before we did the year-end awards, and I still might wait until afterwards because there's so much to see. And
Yeah, we have to prioritize certain
Yes.
things. Maybe a blue hedgehog isn't quite on that list of priorities, but
yeah,
I don't know, man. Like we haven't really talked about the Sonic movies on this podcast.
yeah,
I'm kind of mixed on those movies, especially the first one. I thought the second one was actually more fun. I enjoyed that one a little bit
Sure.
more.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of weirdly looking forward to Sonic the Hedgehog
Yeah.
3, just given this
Yeah,
word of
look,
mouth.
it has an 85 on Rotten Tomatoes, and I was telling my son Sam,
Mhm.
I was like, we're gonna have to go. Like, this film is
Yeah.
getting pretty good reviews, and our peers, especially, that I love and appreciate, and I
Mhm.
revere what they write about. Several of them were like, no, this was like really good. This was like really fun and emotional.
Which honestly excites me because I didn't grow up playing all of the Sonic games. I'm not too well steeped in the lore fully, but there was
Uh-huh.
one Sonic game I absolutely loved, and it was on GameCube called Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, which apparently is the main influential basis for this movie, Sonic the Hedgehog 3.
Okay.
So
Well, there you go.
apparently that's where I guess this film might play into my nostalgic funny bone for that game in particular, which I don't know, maybe this is the one I need to see, like, at least in a theater.
Yeah.
All these other ones I just caught up with at home.
Yeah, I mean, I did grow up somewhat playing the Sonic games, but I
Mhm.
wouldn't say that I'm deeply invested in the lore
Sure,
or
yeah.
even the
I
games.
played a few of the other
certainly
ones.
played
Yeah, I
them.
played a few other ones passively, like with Sega Genesis and all of that. But yeah, only a few of them I was very much tied to. But yeah, I think this is the one we might have to talk about this one. We might have to make room for it.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly went to see them because my son wanted to see them. I took Sam to see both of them in theaters, or I guess the second one. The first one I think came out during COVID or right as COVID and the pandemic was happening.
Yeah.
But we watched the first one for sure. And then he wanted to go see the second one in theaters. I do remember taking him to see that. And I know he's been excited for this film. It's obviously busy with Christmas and everything going on. So he's a little bit distracted, but I told him, hey, look, people are saying this is really good. We're going to have to go. We're going to have to find a time. Like, so this time around, it's me approaching him, telling him that he has to take me to see Sonic.
It's kind of cute. Yeah, he'll be the one driving you there.
Exactly. He's going to be driving me there. Yeah. So I am really looking forward to that. So I did look it up here quickly. So Sonic, I think was released. The first one was released during the pandemic. So we don't really have many numbers to compare to. Sonic 2, though, its opening weekend was $72 million domestically. So fairly close. Fairly close. Not too much of a drop off here with Sonic 3. And with Christmas right around the corner, Mufasa, like it was competing with Mufasa, this Disney movie that is obviously a spinoff of The Lion King.
Yeah.
I do find that somewhat impressive that it was able to do those numbers. And perhaps maybe part of the drop off could be from 75 to 62. Maybe that is a little bit of the crossover there.
I think, yeah, I guess it really,
but
I guess it depends on what Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was competing against the weekend.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I really don't have that information.
Yeah,
in front
so
of me,
yeah,
but-
so that drop off might not be representative of how people feel about the Sonic movies. It's just more about the association of what that
different
competition
context.
is that same weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. So still impressive, $62 million to open for Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Speaking of Mufasa, this is where the parade is canceled. It's all
This is
done.
sad.
Let's go home.
This is sad. This is actually kind of sad, especially given some
is.
of the things we talked about during our review of Mufasa.
Yeah. Yeah, it is sad. And if I'm reading these numbers correctly, even more sad because it was in more theaters technically than Sonic 3. But yeah, Mufasa coming in with $35 million domestically. Thankfully, the international has picked up some of that with another 87.2 overseas. So collectively, it's at 122 as it stands currently. But those domestic numbers are absolutely troublesome because this is a movie that cost over $200 million plus marketing.
Yeah.
So it has a long way to go if this film is going to make its money back. And the overseas market, if the word of mouth is there, and I don't know if it is, but if it is there, maybe the overseas market could help bring this back to even. But it has some work to do.
It has a lot of work to do, and that's so unfortunate, not just for Barry Jenkins, who is a filmmaker that we love, but the thing that you and I talked about during our review of Mufasa is that if it does not do well, Disney is probably going to start fast-tracking more movies like The Lion King 2019.
Yeah.
And now these numbers are scaring me even more, especially considering that domestically, I think it was tracking closer to like 50, and it ended up doing 35 million, which is like something happened. Something happened here domestically that maybe we're not taking into account. I think many people assumed it would be certainly not as big of a hit as The Lion King 2019, but certainly better than what it did this particular opening weekend. That's very troubling to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it is that it's a prequel to The Lion King, so there's no nostalgic tie necessarily to these specific events or characters, like the younger version of some of these characters. Or it perhaps could be that everyone is waiting to go see Nosferatu. Maybe that's what this is.
If that movie ends up going, if that does gangbusters, I'll applaud moviegoers, which I rarely ever do, but I will applaud them if they are able to bring that kind of dough for Nosferatu.
Could you imagine Nosferatu brings in $85 million domestically next weekend? Because that's what people were wanting to save their money on. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say, but Mufasa didn't. I mean, maybe Sonic was a bigger challenger than they assumed it would be. I don't know. It's hard to say, but $35 million, not great. And look, I hope that Barry Jenkins got paid beforehand. I hope none of his salary was tied to how much this makes at the box office.
Yeah.
Because good Lord, the only reason we were, at least as cinephiles, that we were interested in a Barry Jenkins Mufasa movie is that he was going to get his money so he could go do what he wants to do next. That's
and we still want to see that happen. We don't want this detour to be the thing that breaks him. Like that's a
really
horror story right there. Oh my gosh.
It is a horror story.
Yeah.
I hope it does well. I hope the overseas market can help remedy this a little bit, because my goodness.
Me too.
It is not off to a hot start. That is for sure. And then I'll just quickly note Wicked and Moana 2 follow the top two there. They respectively brought in another 13.5 and 13.1 domestically as well for those. So Moana 2 hovering around 790 still. So it is, it's on its fourth weekend. It had that super hot start. And it's kind of stopped in its tracks a little bit.
I was going to say, you brought up them, or them being those two movies, Wicked and Moana 2, respectfully. 13.5 and 13.1 million, they both each brought in, something like that. Which one was in third place?
Wicked.
See, that's where it's interesting, right? Because I feel like for a while there was this, and for those watching on YouTube, I'm doing some hand gestures here to create a visual. There was this gap between Moana 2 and Wicked, as if to suggest Moana 2 is the one with these legs that's now going to overtake Wicked. And that gap just slowly kept tightening as the weekends went on, suggesting that there is perhaps more of a committed and dedicated audience for Wicked. And I think that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think part of it is the fan base for Wicked is obviously very strong, and it's in the awards conversation. So I think it's going to hover, and it's gonna linger there. I very much do think that is the case, and that one worldwide is at 571. So the gap between the two is not terrible.
No.
Not terrible. And
weirdly, I think even though Moana 2 is the one that's made more money in total so far, Wicked seems to be more of the success story between the two.
Yeah. I mean, and Wicked is on its 5th weekend, where Moana 2 is on its 4th weekend. And despite that 1 week difference, Wicked had a less percentage drop than Moana 2. It only dropped 40% from week 4 to 5, whereas Moana 2 from week 3 to 4 dropped 50%.
Yeah.
So there is no legs for Moana 2.
No, it's kind of died.
It's kind of died. I mean, it obviously still did very well.
It still did very well.
I presume Disney is happy with its outcome, but it's not going to be the $1 billion hit that we all thought it probably was going to be when those numbers first rolled in that first weekend.
Yeah, so. It's not even going to reach Inside Out 2 at this point.
No, I don't think it's going to come close at this point. But worth noting that. And the last thing I'll say, and then we'll move on to the films. The Brutalist had a very limited run. Very limited run in New York and LA, but did very well in the few theaters that it was in. A lot of sold out showings. So I don't know if that's indicative of, hey, it's this big movie. There's already a lot of buzz. There's been countless nominations for it already. And so maybe people are starting to get excited for it. It could also just be movies and cinephiles that are grasping at a chance to see this film. I don't know if it means anything from when it gets its wide release, but if it is indicative, if there's any foreshadowing here whatsoever, The Brutalist may be in for a little bit of a surprise.
Well, I think a lot of that also has to do with the specific format that it's playing in, which is kind of this event of sorts, this 70 millimeter format that it's playing in a few places, which is also a more expensive movie-going experience, right? So I think that might also be playing a part into it as well. I think just the sheer scope of what you're buying is what's bringing some of those people there. And that's not to say it won't have that later on. But I think maybe that's why we're seeing a bit of a jump here because of the event-like quality of what it's selling at the moment. Yeah,
for sure. And I'm not exactly sure when that film is going to. I assume it's just going to start trickling out over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Because next week you get Baby Girl, Complete Unknown, Nosferatu, The Fire Inside. Those are all going wide. I assume The Brutalist will expand. I'm not exactly sure as to how much, though. But we'll see. Especially if he gets nominated for Oscars, and maybe that's what they're really waiting for, A24.
Yeah.
Maybe they're waiting for Oscar nomination morning. The Brutalist gets Best Picture, Director, Actor, Supporting Actor, maybe Supporting Actress, Writing.
This thing is probably going to get past 10 nominations. Oscar.
Yeah, it's very likely. And then you use that as your marketing campaign to be like, go see our movie. It's been nominated for 10 Oscars.
Yeah.
And then that's when they expand it and let people go hog wild with it.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I assume that's the plan here.
It's a good plan.
With The Brutalist. It is a good plan.
Yeah.
I hope it does well. Anyway, I just wanted to note that. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and move on. We have a lot of films that we're going to cover. Some of these we'll get through quickly. And to start with, I'm going to do this very, very briefly. The Christmas classic, the Dwayne Johnson Red One movie that just came out. I have unlocked the secret. So this is a film that has been absolutely torn to shreds by critics. People have not really liked this film. However, it turns out that there's a formula here. To enjoy Red One, you need to at least down 5 gin and tonics. At least 5, because that's what I did. I went into that film feeling good about myself, let's just say, and I kind of enjoyed it. I couldn't tell you much about the movie, but I was feeling pretty good about myself, and that's how I watched that movie.
The InSession Film Podcast does not condone the over excessive usage of alcohol. Unless it comes with watching Red One, I guess.
Yeah. I'm just saying. I can't give you a sober review. Maybe it's as bad as everyone. Like, you look at that on Letterboxd, there's a lot of 1/2 and 1 star and 2 stars for that, and from a lot of our peers that we love and revere. I don't know. I can't really tell you, and I'm gonna be honest. I don't think I'm ever gonna watch that film sober. I probably won't ever watch it again unless my kids decide, hey, let's give that one a spin.
So as you said, you barely even remember what you saw.
I mean, I can remember.
Okay, I'm just making sure. Did this even count as a watch for you?
I'm gonna count it as a watch. Yeah, absolutely. Because look, again, like, I didn't loathe it. I didn't hate it. Was that the alcohol talking? Maybe it was the alcohol. I don't know. Maybe the alcohol kind of takes all of the cringy dialogue and makes it more, accessible.
It is sometimes a pretty good trial to test whether a movie is truly bad or not, is how it functions when you're not sober. I've had instances where I've actually downed something. Maybe I've downed like 7 glasses of bourbon or something like that, and I chose to watch, I don't know, M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening, which many people say is a great movie to watch while drunk. And no, it still sucks. It is still boring as hell. So that one does not pass the test, but some of them do.
That's the thing. Like, because there's a lot happening in Red One, and there's a lot of Christmas and mythological lore. Obviously, Krampus shows up at one point, and that whole sequence is all done through practical makeup, which is fascinating.
Okay.
So, like,
I can respect
again,
that.
like, it's probably not a good movie, but when you watch it under the state that I was in, I'm feeling good about myself. I am quite buzzed, and I can't focus on the bad things because my mind is spinning. You know what I mean? So, like, maybe it was the alcohol that was just letting me loose.
Maybe I'll try this.
Enjoy it.
Okay, so when we do our catch-up episode next week, and if I've done the same exercise, I'll come back and report if this actually works.
Yeah, because, like, look, again, I'm not saying that it's good by any stretch of the imagination, especially on an objective level. I'm just saying the alcohol for me unlocked a little bit of fun. That's all.
Okay.
Or at least it kept me from hating it like everyone else.
Gosh, that should be
But
our
again,
poll
that could
quote.
just be the alcohol making me feel good. I don't know. Who knows?
That should be our poll quote. Watch this after having like 10 eggnogs or something like that.
Exactly. There you go. Okay. So anyway, that's Red One. Let's start here.
Heck of a way to start.
Let's start with Smile 2.
Okay, we're going here first. This is interesting.
So, because this is one that Brendan and I kind of go back and forth on. And look, I guess I'll just lay it out here because I know Brendan is higher on this than I am. The Smile movies are just not for me. They're just not
That's
for
fair.
me. I do think Smile 2 is much better than its predecessor for reasons Brendan, I'm sure, will go into. But I think I'm at a point where I have to admit defeat. And I think that's where I'm at with this franchise.
There is a formula here that is very wash, rinse, repeat, and repeat, and repeat, right? I don't necessarily disagree with those sentiments that you have for these movies and why they ultimately don't work for you. And that's why you find them kind of tiring before they even reach the end credits, right? And I've heard that criticism from many people, not just you. I've heard that from many people. And while I even enjoyed the first Smile movie more than you did, I do acknowledge it has a lot of problems. It severely overstays its welcome, and that is its biggest problem. And in many ways, Smile 2 also does kind of overstay its welcome too, but it really hones in on the things that did make the first Smile at least interesting and run with those, which is why it is significantly better. I don't even know if I want to call this a sequel. It feels like a redo in many ways. It feels like it's kind of taking the first movie and trying to do it better because it follows the same formula, but Parker Finn as a filmmaker, I think, is playing with the goofiness of its premise a little bit more. He's having a lot more fun with the scare tactics and the cinematography is actually very playful at times. And then there's Naomi Scott's performance, which is, I'm not saying it's among my 5 best female lead performances of the year, but I think it almost could be that good. I think she's really carrying this thing so hard that she's practically directing the movie. She is breaking her back carrying this thing. And I think in her performance, she is able to fill in some of these missing gaps that perhaps the script doesn't give us regarding its music industry backdrop, and how even removing the smile demon, you have what is still a pretty interesting movie about a celebrity's own self-destruction due to the high pressuring beauty and artistic standards that they are held to. I think she sells those things. She absolutely does. Yeah. And in many ways, she saves the movie. So I do wonder, though, like, I know you're kind of mixed on this movie overall. I wonder if I would agree had it not been for Naomi Scott's performance, because I think it is a fair question to ask. I do think she is that good.
I mean, I do agree with you that she is terrific here. I do really love the performance. And to your point, I think it's more seamless and compelling regarding the entity as an allegory.
Yeah.
However, like the first film, I do think Smile 2 struggles to escape the gimmick. And funny enough, you talked about how this is more of a reboot than a sequel. The opening scene is a literal continuation from where the first film.
I know, but it's almost like you don't even need the first movie in many ways. That opening scene is almost like a thing. Yeah, we're tying it to that original movie, but it's also a way of completely disconnecting itself from the original movie as well.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Outside of the opening, though, it is nothing but a series of continued hallucinations, one after another. There's this hallucination here, and then the next scene is a hallucination. And then the next scene, you won't guess this, Brendan, another hallucination. And then the scene after that, it won't, like, get ready for this, another hallucination. That goes on for 45 minutes. And then there's one scene at a bar where it's focused on plot. And you're like, oh my God.
We actually have some story here. Yeah.
There's actually something to this.
That might be my least favorite scene in the movie. Is the scene at the
It's
bar.
certainly one of the most conventional, that's for sure. But at least it was different. We injected the film with a new energy. And then guess what? After that, more hallucinations. And then more hallucinations. And then you get to the end of the film, which is obviously slightly different, but it's more or less a copy or regurgitation of the ending of the first film. And so I did not sense any sort of progression here. Like, that is ultimately the biggest difference between you and I. I think Naomi Scott is great. She's really, really good. But despite how good she is, she's stuck within the confines of this script that is asking her to do the same thing over and over and over again. And I don't know if anyone can overcome that redundancy. Well, she is very good. Like, in a vacuum from scene to scene, she does sell those moments. I do agree. Absolutely agree. Like, and I'm not pinning this on her at all. Do not get me wrong. She is the least on the list as far as the problems of this film goes. She is breaking her back. I wholeheartedly agree with you.
Absolutely.
She does carry it well, but I think the script and the gimmick doesn't allow for any sort of progression. There's just a lot of the same things for me, to the point where, again, I just found so much of this mundane, and I think it's bogged down in cheap, easily predicted jump scares that leave a lot to be desired. There wasn't anything there that I found compelling. And I don't know, maybe because I caught up with both of these, because I didn't see the first Smile until, I don't know, some weeks before getting to see Smile 2. And when you look at some of the horror films that came out this year, especially when I think of something like The First Omen, and then I compare that to these, and it's like, out of my face. The filmmaking here to me is so cheap comparatively.
Well, the jump scares, I think, are probably the weakest thing here. There's a bit of a repetitive nature to it. Where I think this film, Smile 2, is most effective as a horror film is when it's actually playing with the hallucinatory vibes in a way that's not trying to make you jump in a traditional scare tactic kind of way. So when I think of sequences where Naomi Scott is coming in contact with a group of dancers stalking her throughout this mirror hallway, and they're like slowly inching up at her. Like when it's actually playing with visual horror as opposed to anticipatory horror, I actually think it's more effective. But we do get perhaps too many of those jump scare preps that we get in a lot of horror movies. I think the film is at its best when it's not trying to be a series of jump scares. And I think the film would have been more effective had it just been more of a visual hallucinatory allegory than anything else, because I think that is where it's at its strongest. I did sense a little bit of that progression that you were missing, primarily due to Naomi Scott's performance. I do think there is an arc in her character. I think she is absolutely filling in the gaps in that script that are actively there. It's something that I don't think Sosie Bacon was able to do in that first Smile film. I do think that one is way more repetitive in nature because of that. So again, it goes back to what I said earlier. If it weren't for Naomi Scott's performance here, I wonder if we would really be in different camps here. I think if anything,
Perhaps.
she kind of saves this movie in a lot of ways.
For sure. And I mean, I'm being maybe a little facetious with some of the filmmaking, but I do hold to those criticisms that I think the film is bogged down in those cheap, easily predicted jump scares, and the camera work on the whole is much less fascinating to me compared to something like The First Omen. But I do think
this is a better movie. Yeah,
this is still better than The First Smile for sure. I just think the gimmick here kind of keeps this film trapped and keeps Naomi Scott's performance a little bit trapped. So, I mean, maybe our biggest disparity does come down to the sense of progression, which again, I think is more on the filmmaking and the gimmick than it is her performance.
I don't think that progression is there had it not been for her performance. So if we meet in the middle just a little bit, I think that's where we could.
For sure. All right. So that is Smile 2. All right, Brendan, let's talk about coffee. I love coffee. I know you do as well.
It's necessary in life.
The source that keeps us going each and every single day, and we all need it.
It's what keeps us alive, honestly.
It's what keeps us alive.
Yeah.
And look, if you're going to drink coffee, you might as well drink good coffee. You don't need to drink bad coffee where it requires you to put in a bunch of sugar and chocolate and caramel and other nonsense. That stuff is good on ice cream. You don't need it in your coffee. Okay? That is what is great about Coffee Cult, because they source specialty grade coffee that has natural flavors that you can taste in the coffee, such as chocolate. You think about the Sumatra coffee. It's really, really good. Like, there are really incredible notes of chocolate in the Sumatra. One of my favorites is the Holiday Blend that is currently available right now. And that's a coffee that has great notes of not just chocolate, but also caramel and other great notes as well. There are coffees that are more on the fruity side of things. If you want like coffees that have notes of blueberries and orange and cherry, they have that as well. And these are natural flavors in the coffee. All
derived from those cocoa beans as a natural ingredient there. And Coffee Cult beautifully understands that the making of coffee really is an art form. It absolutely is.
It is. Yeah, it is. From the growing process, which is why they work with the farms really closely, because it begins there. There's all different kinds of processes to get these flavors in the coffee, because again, it's all natural. So they work with the farms to ensure that those processes are being done ethically and done in the right way. And then the roasting side of it is very specific as well. They really go out of their way to make sure this coffee is the very best that you can buy. So go check it out. Coffeecult.com. That's coffee with a K, cult with a K. Coffeecult.com. At checkout, use our code ISF and you'll get 15% off at checkout. Again, that code is ISF24, ISF24. Use that code at checkout and you'll get 15% off. And we thank Coffee Cult for their support. All right, let's talk about the InSession Film Store. Let's talk about t-shirts.
Let's talk about swag. Got lots of swag.
Mugs,
lots of swag with our logo
stickers. Yeah, so at the InSession Film Store, we have a lot of great designs up there that you can go and check out. Some of it is just our basic logo, but even I have designs up there with our logo, let's say in the Star Wars font.
Yeah.
We have it up there in other styles as well, like in the Barbie style.
Barbie. I was just going to say Barbie. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah. I tried Dune. Warner Brothers didn't like that as much.
Of course they did. I understand why, but still.
They struck us down.
Nice to have. Yeah, it would have been nice to have.
Would have been nice to have. Of all companies, Disney has not yelled at us for having the Star Wars font.
You would think they might like money.
You think they would?
They do. Yeah.
But we have, we got Women in Session up there. We got Chasing the Gold. I have an awards Stop Turning Art into Sports t-shirt if you want to go check that out.
Still think my favorite is probably the Midnight Special shirt that you put together some months ago.
And we got a Rival as well. And we have a couple of new shirts up there as well. I'm not wearing it currently, but we have a new t-shirt that has a phrase from the Cameron Crowe film, Almost Famous, from Lester Bangs.
Yep.
And the only true currency in this bankrupt world is what you share with someone else when you're uncool. I got that shirt. I've actually posted it on my social medias if you want to go and check it out. I had some really great comments about it, so
it's a great shirt.
I hope people go and check it out. We got a new one. I got this one out. I wanted to kind of test this one out, so I got this. This is one of our latest ones as well. So go to the store at InSessionFilm.com. You can go to InSessionFilm.com/store. Or go to TeePublic directly at TeePublic.com/stores/InSessionFilm. Again, that is TeePublic.com/stores/InSessionFilm. They got a lot of great holiday deals going on right now. So you can get t-shirts right now for $16.
Absolutely.
So you can go and check all that out there. And
all different styles too. Yeah, different like different fabrics of t-shirts. You can get them in sweatshirts as well. Yeah, various designs you can pick from.
Yeah, and you can get them in mugs. You can get them in stickers, magnets, whatever you want. So they have a bunch of other stuff up there, but t-shirts is the main thing.
Absolutely.
And it really helps support us out. So go and check it out. If you have an idea for a design, hit me up. I would love to look into that as well. So. Thank you for your support. It really does mean the world to us, and we hope that you enjoy the InSession Film swag.
Absolutely.
They can get through TeePublic, and we really appreciate everyone's support. Where do you want to go next? Should we talk about the piano lesson?
We could talk about that. That's been out for some time. We should probably get to that one, shouldn't we?
The piano lesson here. So this is directed by Malcolm Washington. And it stars John David Washington. Who would have thought? Who would have thought?
Yeah. The Washington's at it again.
What did you think about the piano lesson?
So this is also another adaptation of one August Wilson. We've had 3 major cinematic adaptations of his work. Alongside the piano lesson, we've had Fences, the Denzel Washington film. So again, the Washingtons really loving the work of August Wilson, right?
Yes, they do. They do.
And they've obviously had experience with August Wilson's work on the stage as well. That's what Denzel Washington had experience with. That's why he chose to bring Fences to the screen.
Exactly.
So there's absolutely a history there. We also had Ma Rainey's Black Bottom a few years ago, which is the film that many thought Chadwick Boseman was going to win Best Actor for posthumously, and that didn't happen, sadly. We all remember that situation at the Oscars. What a debacle that was.
Crazy debacle.
So we've had 3 of these adaptations thus far. I think I like all 3 of them about the same. What I do like about the piano lesson, though, is that of the 3, it's the one that feels the most like it's trying to be an actual cinematic movie, as opposed to the other 2, which... again, I am trying to get away from using the term stagey when describing stage adaptations as a criticism, because that's kind of inherent a lot of times. It really comes down to the sense of feeling that these movies give off, as if it's just shot on a stage and we're just simply getting the cinematic version of that. But here with the piano lesson, Malcolm Washington, I think, is doing some pretty creative things and ambitious things with the camera. I think he's turning this into something that feels way more cinematic than Fences and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. There's a ghostly element to it that I do think is at times very haunting. It is a very well shot movie in those regards. I think if anything holds this movie back for me, and I'm very curious to see what you think about this, I don't think this film is as consistent as those other two performatively. I don't know if these actors are all on the same page with regard to the piano lesson. I think that's really its biggest disparity. I feel like they're all giving very different performances that don't feel like they're part of the same sandbox or the same medium, if that makes sense. I feel like the ones that really are doing great work are Danielle Deadwyler, Corey Hawkins. Surprisingly, Ray Fisher's pretty good. I kind of liked him here. I did not like John David Washington in this. I really didn't. And I don't know if he was directed to act like his father, Denzel, but man, he is channeling that fatherly energy more so than he has ever done before. It is so distracting to me. And I don't know if that was intentional. It almost sounds like he was directed to do that, given the fact that this is also directed by Malcolm Washington, right? So I do wonder if that was the intent. So I think performatively speaking, there is a major inconsistency here that I didn't always love, but I did love the cinematic language of what it was going for comparatively to something like Fences or Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. And I do think it is a powerful story about the history of slavery and ownership and how these individuals feel like they have progressed from that and what they need to take with them. You know, like the familial ties to it, I think, are really interesting for sure.
Yeah. Well, since Brendan read from my Letterboxd review, I think we can go ahead and end it there. I don't really have too much to add. I wholeheartedly agree with everything he said there. It is one of the better August Wilson adaptations, visually speaking. It is redolent. It is cinematically enthralling. It does feel stagey at times, but more so than the other adaptations we've seen. This is a film that takes full advantage of the medium, what film can offer. It is tonally quite tense at times, especially that ending sequence, I think, is fantastic. That is something that cannot be replicated on the stage. What we get there in those final moments, that is something only a movie can do. Agreed. And I think tonally, you marry that with the visual work here, the sound design, which I think is incredible.
Good call
and
out.
The editing, and it does create a suspenseful ghost story. I wholeheartedly agree on that front. And to your point, performatively, Danielle Deadwyler is always phenomenal. She's really, really good here. Ray Fisher, I think, is a revelation. He might give my favorite performance of the film. He is really
interesting. Okay,
really good. I think
it's really
it's
the biggest surprise for sure.
Surprise performances of the year. Yeah. John David Washington is giving a performance for the stage and not the screen. And that is quite distracting here. I don't know exactly the why that was the approach here, but I mean, he is shouting like he is aiming for the stage, and like in moments that don't require it. Like he's just, I don't know if he's done this on the stage, and so that's what he's tapping into. I really have no idea, to your point, if he's being directed that way. But it is very disconnected from the rest of these performances that are giving film performances and not stage performances. And then on top of that, yes, I think he's done a great job of avoiding this to this point, but he sounds more like his dad here than anything else he's ever done, like by a landslide. And it's really hard to shake that. really hard to shake that.
It is,
so, like, I really like John David Washington. This just isn't one of his finer performances for me.
No, I'm with you. And it's not that it's not the shouting itself that I think is necessarily the problem, because he plays Boy Willie here, who is, for reasons that are understandable, is carrying a lot of anger in him. All right, so I understand the
Yeah.
shouting nature, but there are moments where he's maybe sitting down and talking to I think it's his niece, right? They're having very tender and very loving conversations, and I'm sitting there thinking, why are you shouting at her? It's
Yeah.
like to your point, moments that don't require that level of aggression, he is still delivering that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just not working for this film, I don't think.
Yeah, there's just a loudness to the performance that comes from the stage.
Mhm.
Like the character might not be evoking an emotion, but
Mhm.
he's loud, like he's trying to reach the back of the audience
Yeah.
and not someone that's in a room with him, because this is a film.
Yeah.
Like it's strange. It's a
It's
strange approach. I don't think it works.
it's kind of like
Uh,
he's giving his Malcolm and Marie performance in a movie like this, and it does not require that at all.
It's weird.
Yeah.
It is weird. Ray Fisher is great though. He was a lovely surprise. My favorite aspect to the film, aside from Deadweiler, who's just always really good anyway.
I agree.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to Pablo Larraín. Let's talk about
Maria.
his new film, Maria. So this is obviously the ending of his trilogy, coming off of Jackie and Spencer, respectfully, over the last several years.
Yeah.
What did you think about Maria?
Well, I love how this one actually does officially acknowledge that these were part of a trilogy by having
Yeah.
JFK in this one, played by the same actor once again, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of like
Yeah,
that through line there.
he's really obsessed with the whole JFK thing, isn't he?
I think he is. Yeah. I mean, it looks just like JFK as well, so I understand why he's been cast a few times already. So yeah, I guess this is kind of this unofficial, now official trilogy, right? And many people have been acknowledging that this is the lesser of the three between Jackie, Spencer, and now Maria. I think I agree with that. Now, I guess for a little bit of context, and you may remember this, JD, I was not as high on Spencer as most other people were.
Yeah.
I think
know.
if
We
anything,
accept
that's
your
where.
apology.
Yep, yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. I'm glad we're still friends here. But the thing with that film, I thought that it was all of these films, especially Jackie and Spencer, they're all psychodramas, but those first two were kind of teetering on the edge of horror movie territory at times, which I kind of like that idea. I just feel like Pablo Larraín was going too hard with that approach in Spencer, like he was doing the work for us, and I thought it was a little too loud in that regard, but I loved Kristen Stewart's performance. And I also loved Natalie Portman's performance in Jackie.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
do appreciate that Maria is more restrained by comparison. It's a more observational film. It almost feels more mundane by comparison. This is the last week in Maria Callas's life, so it's all leading up to that final moment of hers and this frailty that she has been dealing with, this feeling of lost talent, like she is really just trying to prove for herself that she still has, and maybe, the sense of aging and mistakes that she made along the way is now stripping her away from that, and her coming to terms
Yeah.
with that, I do think is a powerful notion. So I like a lot of the ideas of this film being more restrained, more observational, and just visually gorgeous. Ed Lockman, kind of the star of this movie in many ways.
Yeah.
I think where this film does suffer, at least it did for me, especially when compared to Jackie and Spencer, I think it comes down to the Angelina Jolie of it all. And,
Interesting. Okay.
we heard, I think we heard something similar from our own editor-in-chief, Dave Giannini, where he talked about that Angelina Jolie being such a big name person that she is, it's easy to only see her and not the person that she's playing, which, to Natalie Portman and Kristen Stewart's credit, I feel like they were able to overcome that. And I felt like I was seeing the people they were playing and not just them. I mostly only saw Angelina Jolie in this movie. I don't know if she quite transformed as the other two in this trilogy did. And that kind of held back a little bit of my my engagement with this movie. I think she's giving a very good performance overall. But again, knowing that this is a biopic, I think I would have liked it more if it weren't, given the type of performance that she's giving. Because I kept seeing Angelina Jolie get in the way when I was trying to see more of Maria Callas. So that was the big reservation I had, which is why I like the film overall, but I'm not in love with it.
Okay, well, it's interesting that we're both in the same camp as far as being mixed on this film, or liking it but being a little mixed. I do agree with that sentiment, but it does appear to be that we arrive there quite differently.
Okay.
Now, I am with you. This is quite the departure from the pseudo horror psycho drama that we saw with Spencer and with Jackie. I love the approach to both of those films in that regard. The haunting psychological unraveling we saw with those characters, the performances, I found it all quite invigorating.
Okay.
This is much more restrained in terms of the filmmaking, the approach tonally. It is very different. Where this film falters the most for me is that it is surprisingly conventional in its narrative approach. It is disjointed in terms of the timeline of it all as well. And it is way more Wikipedia. It is not just conventional. It is more Wikipedia than I would like it to be.
It's more scripted by comparison, which is interesting because this is written by Stephen Knight, who also wrote Spencer. But one of the things I did like about Spencer is that it feels like other things about that movie are trying to kind of mask the script. Like that's a movie that didn't feel as heavily scripted or as heavily dialogue driven, right? Which I think was one of the biggest benefits of that movie. But this one, I think the script, you're right, kind of does get in the way a little bit.
Yeah, and again, where we do disagree, because I think those gaps are made up in Angelina Jolie's performance.
Okay.
I did not have the same issues that you and Nate and Dave did.
Okay.
I do think she gives a beautiful performance here. I was able to see the character, and I did not need those flashback scenes. I didn't. I appreciate the black and white cinematography, I guess. It is visually lush and vibrant. I very much do agree there. But all of the soulful unraveling, the struggle to accept her identity as she is at this time of her life, where she has aged out of being able to do the one thing that she was born to do. I think all of that is in Jolie's performance. I did not need the Wikipedia flashbacks to tell us all of the things that she had experienced in her life. I didn't need that. I can go look that stuff up on Wikipedia after the film is over. Like, you don't have to tell me those things. And the whole JFK of it all does feel shoehorned to me as a result. Like, Pablo Larraín is also obsessed with that narrative. And so we have to go back to that. I was simply waiting for Natalie Portman to show up in this film. I was totally prepared for it.
I was kind of thinking that. What I was thinking about was to compare these movies to another trilogy, the Three Colors trilogy, right? Which all are essentially their own separate stories, but there's a moment in the third outing in Three Colors Red that brings them all together in a more literal way. I felt like this was kind of building to something similar, that we would somehow see them all in like maybe they all happen to be in the same room coincidentally for a moment or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. And look, there is real history that makes sense if that was going to be the case.
Sure.
I would not have been opposed to it because there is real history there. I understand why Lorraine would maybe do something like that. However, I think where this film is at its best is in the modern day scenes where we see Maria, engaging in the dynamic and the relationship of her help there at the house. Those two characters, I think, are really interesting as well. And again, just the psychological, where this is complementary to those previous two films. It's not horrific in tone. but there's still a psychological unraveling with Maria because she cannot accept that this is who she is now. And I was compelled by that. I was compelled by Jolie's performance. So the disjointed narrative and the Wikipedia style, I think, completely disrupts this film in a jarring way that does not really work for me all that much. But I think the modern day scenes, I think, are so good that in the end, I still liked it overall, especially when you couple it with Ed Luckman's cinematography, which is very striking.
Yeah.
That, and I don't want to, like, Lorraine's direction from moment to moment, he's always in command. He is a great filmmaker. So yeah, from scene to scene, there's so much in terms of the directorial touch he brings.
Yeah.
That is great. I just think the broad approach from a storytelling perspective was the wrong one here.
No, I think that's fair. I like a lot of the ideas that it's going for, but I do think by comparison to both Jackie and Spencer, this is, maybe it is because of those flashback sequences as well, I think this is the less nuanced of the three. I feel like its messaging is certainly the most obvious. Really just its depiction of an artist's own insecurities and struggling with aging is really what it is. Of course, there's more to it when you look at it in individual scenes in a vacuum, but in totality, I think this is the most straightforward of the three. And I like the idea of it being more restrained, but it certainly doesn't have the staying power and the level of provocation that a movie like Jackie had, which I haven't seen every film from Pablo Larraín just yet, but I feel like I can almost safely say Jackie is his best movie. I think there is an argument for that, and I wouldn't be surprised if I even hold to that after I see everything that Larraín has directed. But Jackie is a pretty darn special movie, if you ask me. And I like
think Jackie's great.
I really like that one quite a bit. This is a director that's really hard to pin down. Because just before this, he directed El Conde, completely different experience.
Movie. Such a different movie.
And every one of his movies has a very unique vibe that almost feels like they were directed by different people. And I kind of like directors who do that. But yeah, this one, I overall, even if we overlook the disagreement we have around Angelina Jolie, I think the structure and the script writing here is a bit too on the nose when I think it needed a little bit more internalized conflict that could be more interpretive than it is literal.
Yep, absolutely. We're both mixed. Arrived there differently, but yeah, both kind of positive mixed. And I do agree with you on Lorraine. Jackie is his best work that I've seen to date. I will say, as much as I love Spencer, and I really, really do love it a lot, I think there's an argument to be made that Emma is his second best film.
It's an interesting one.
Love that one a lot
Very
too.
Interesting one. Yeah.
Those are my top three, though, as it stands now, easily.
Okay.
Those three.
Gotcha.
But
okay.
El Conde's still fun, though. That was a fun departure. I did enjoy it.
Yeah, probably should have been a short film. I think that's one that did overstay its welcome a little bit.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Okay, so that is Maria. Let's go ahead and move on to The Order.
Okay.
Speaking of Nicholas Hoult, right? We've been talking about him a lot this year.
He's the star of 2024, right?
He's the star of 2024. He is, of course, in this film alongside Jude Law and Ty Sheridan, among others. Justin Kurzel directing this one.
Yeah.
Interesting because it tackles a subject matter that, like the events of this film take place, I believe, in the 80s. However, the manifesto at the center of this film was part of the nucleus to the January 6th riots as well. So it is prevalent to today as well. That's maybe where Kurzel got the idea to do this. I don't really know. And there's a nonfiction book called The Silent Brotherhood as well. So there's adapted material, but it is relevant to today. So
it's very relevant to today. Yeah. And it's a scary and frightening notion, right?
Yeah. What'd you think?
Yeah. I think given those real life ramifications that are at play here, it's why I liked the movie, but I didn't love it. Because Justin Kurzel is a filmmaker that when you look at his past films, there's something kind of dangerous about his movies. I can't think of any other word, but movies like Macbeth, or did you see Neutrum? That true
No, that's
story.
one I sadly missed.
Oh
Yeah.
my, that is a vile and frightening movie. I will never watch that again, but it feels like a dangerous movie. And I think The Order by comparison feels like Justin Kurzel with many of the edges shaved off. I think this is a very solid thriller. I think that's the best thing I could say for it. It's very efficient. I was very entertained by it. But I do wish it was a little bit edgier. I think Nicholas Hoult is very terrifying in it, and perhaps I wish there was even more of him to kind of counterbalance the more conventional touches that this movie is still living within. I love the quiet restraint of Nicholas Hoult. I think he is quite great. But I think on the, or I should say in the category of sociopolitical thrillers from this year, this has got nothing on Rebel Ridge. I think that is certainly the most
Fair.
That is the more interesting and thought-provoking version of this in its own sociopolitical way, but I think in a high-level vacuum, that's the more interesting movie. Very, very much so. I think this is solid. I think it's thrilling. I just don't think it has the edge to leave an impact. At least it didn't quite get there for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't know if this is a film that required a lot of edge, and maybe that is the difference for me. Maybe that means Kurzel wasn't the right director for this material. That could certainly be the case as well. But I think bringing that same edge here would have maybe done a disservice to this material, because what I do like about what he does here, it is a simple cat and mouse procedural. It never relents in its gripping tension. There is a propulsion to this film that I do really like. However, where this does detour from Kurzel's film, but what I appreciate about this one is how restrained it is. Because there are times here where, and this happens often, it's not just a few times. I mean, there are many examples here where Kurzel will simply pause to reflect and demonstrate how these men are more than the causes they stand for. And it reflects on the sacrifices that they're willing to make to the point of even abandoning your community. So I do really like how there is a sharpness to these characters. And that's where I really do appreciate the writing. I appreciate that he's willing to pause the movie to let, that introspection come to the surface. I do agree. I don't think it goes as deep as it could, because again, for as much as he pauses, we have to get back to the cat and mouse as much as we can. So it is a little bit of a dichotomy in that regard. But I don't think these characters are stock caricatures. I do think there is some nuance here. And I really like the performances. Jude Law and Nicholas Hoult are both really, really fantastic. I like Ty Sheridan. The cinematography is really great. I like the whole 80s aesthetic. Gotta love those mustaches. They're perfect.
I was hopefully, I think I was a big influence on him.
Yeah, I think you were. You totally were. So I do think there's a lot to like here. And honestly, I maybe selfishly, I wish the film had more time to remove itself from the cat and mouse of it all and just let those character moments kind of come to the surface. Like, I think about that moment with Nicholas Holt's character, and like those interactions he has with his son there or with his girlfriend. Like, those kind of moments I kind of simmer here in a way that I do find is really interesting. I understand that you kind of want to invoke like a Heat type aesthetic with the action a little bit.
Well,
but
yeah.
I honestly don't think that's the strength of this movie. I think it's in the small, intimate moments where this film shines the best. So that teetering is a little off. That is my biggest criticism of the film.
Yeah.
But I kind of love that this is more restrained than what we're used to with Crizell.
Well, you are talking about things I wanted to get to, and maybe it helps best articulate where I think the edges being shaved off more than I would have liked is actually where I think that's most noticeable is perhaps in that balancing between the cat and mouse procedural element and this more white supremacist groups element, right? There are basically two separate stories happening here. And you called out Michael Mann's Heat, which is a film that is very much about that balance between good and evil, right?
Yes.
And what makes that movie so effective is how it treats both Al Pacino and Robert De Niro as main characters. They are equally main characters.
Yeah.
That balance is severely off here in the order. This is the main character here is Jude Law. Like, it's absolutely Jude Law's movie in many ways, even though I feel like it should have been more balanced between him and Bob Matthews, played by Nicholas Hoult. Because I think there are dynamics between Bob Matthews and not just his family, but the idea that his own group has essentially been ostracized by this other church that they went to that is also very evil in their own right. So the fact that there's a disagreement between evil itself, I think, is a really interesting notion. I feel like the balance is trying to put more favor towards the police procedural element. And I think that's a huge disservice here. I wish it was more 50-50 that as opposed to like 70-30, which is what it felt like to me.
That's interesting. I'd have to go back and rewatch the movie because, again, it's been, I don't know, a month and a half since I've seen this, but that is not my recollection of it. I think Bob is in the film quite a lot. You know, I think of those moments he has with his wife when she is approaching him, that moment with his son, as I talked about earlier. There's a moment with his, like him in the church kind of riling up his community against the church, like those that want to follow him. There's another scene with one of the informants that is now working for the FBI. So like there's a lot where we see Bob interacting with his community or with his family, and we get to know him. So I do agree with you that it's not quite Heat level in terms of being able to strike that balance perfectly.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's terribly far off either. Like I think there's a lot, like he's on screen a lot here.
You might be right that the balancing is mathematically not that far off, but it might seem more like it's far off when spending so much time with Terry Husk, played by Jude Law, is really what is driving the entire plot of the movie. So it almost makes it seem like the balance is off, maybe more so than it mathematically is. At least it did for me.
And again, maybe that's what I found interesting about Holt here in his performance. You are right. The plot is driven through Terry, but the heart of it and the thematic nuance of this film, I think, comes through with Bob and trying to give us more than a caricature man whose philosophies are very thinly veiled. And let's be honest, they are. But the film wants to try to understand that psychology a little bit and kind of gives the character space to do so. Obviously, we don't agree with his choices, but there is an attempt to articulate his humanity and why and what would drive someone to make these choices. Again, it doesn't quite nail the landing, but I don't think it's terrible by any stretch of the imagination.
No, I still think it's a very solid.
It does a good job. Yeah, it does a good job.
I was very entertained by this, and I was still very much thrilled by it overall. I think it plays with suspense well, even when I'm trying not to spoil it, so I'm trying to pick my words carefully here, but there is at least one character that crystallizes in a way that's meant to be kind of surprising, we'll simply say. I think the movie very deliberately plants those seeds that it's not much of a shock. I felt like that was coming pretty much like 30 or 40 minutes into the movie. It's like, well, that character is going to suffer this fate right here. I just know that's going to happen. And of course that does happen. But it's hard to criticize that when it seems like that was very deliberate, right? I feel like it's almost like Justin Kurzel recognizes this is based on a true story. There's no reason to play with suspense regarding killing off certain characters or not, right? So I even though it's not thrilling in the same way that a Heat is, it's not meant to be. But I was still very much engaged by it because the performances are strong. Like they're definitely delivering the right kind of performances to carry this material.
And that is certainly the difference between doing something fictional and doing something inspired by real events, right?
Right.
Like Brady Corbet has recently talked about this in an interview where he did The Brutalist. And honestly, all three of his directorial efforts are kind of this way. I think it was in that conversation with Sean Baker, now that I'm thinking about it, where he was talking about how if you're doing it based off of real life, you are kind of limited unless you're going way off the rails, and you might rub some people the wrong way. But if you take those events and inspire it into something that is fictional, then you have all the room in the world to play in your sandbox. You don't have to be limited. But, it's the choice that Kurzel made, and, they wanted to adapt that book, which is obviously based off of real events. So it is what it is.
It is what it is. It's a solid movie, though. It's a very solid movie.
I did really like it. Yeah. All right, let's move on to Gia Coppola's The Last Showgirl. So this stars Pamela Anderson, Jamie Lee Curtis, Dave Bautista, Billy Lord, Jason Schwartzman in a small little cameo. He's just showing up everywhere these days. What did you think about The Last Showgirl?
Earlier in this review, we talked about during Smile 2 how a great performance can sometimes elevate the material in a way, or at least make the product better. In that case, Naomi Scott really breaking her back carrying that movie. Yeah, I feel like that's the same thing I can say about The Last Showgirl. It's not just Pamela Anderson, who I'm sure we'll talk about a lot, but it's also Dave Bautista. It's also Billy Lord.
It's Dave Bautista.
Dave Bautista is actually surprisingly
He's
great.
so
in this.
good.
At times, he might even give my favorite performance here, but there's a meta quality to Pamela Anderson's performance. Yeah. Similarly to what people have already praised Demi Moore.
Yeah, we talked about Demi Moore in the same way earlier in the year.
Yeah, for The Substance. So it's a very similar type of performance. I think I might slightly prefer Pamela Anderson as just a performative, form, I guess. I think I liked her performance more in this movie by comparison. That's not to knock the other one. I just think what Pamela Anderson's doing here is kind of revelatory. I think it's really quite great. I wish I could get on the movie's wavelength aside from just these performances and how committed that they are. The movie feels like a first draft. It really does. It feels like it has very little of merit on its mind outside of just its plot. And I found that really unfortunate. I also think it makes some very questionable cinematography choices that really drove me nuts, if I'm being perfectly honest. This could have been one of my lesser films of the year had it not been for Pamela Anderson, as well as Dave Bautista and Billy Lord. And whatever Jamie Lee Curtis is doing in this movie, it's certainly not boring. I'll tell you that. But yeah, these actors really do save this thing. From what I think on the page and even on screen kind of feels, I hate calling a movie a nothing movie because that seems overly harsh, but I don't think this really delivers anything. And if it is, it's the performances filling in the gaps. That's exactly what they're doing. Yeah,
I am mostly with you. I do understand why the film has received middling responses. To your point, the screenplay does feel like a first draft. The cinematography is wildly uneven. But I agree, Pamela Anderson delivers one of the most heartbreaking, complex, and beautiful performances of the year. The ache and sorrow she conveys is absolutely palpable, and it is deeply felt. It is deeply felt. Her character of Shelley has these deep convictions for a lost art in a city that is becoming more and more kind of lost in terms of what it can be or what it used to be. Like there's like this nostalgia factor to her as it relates to the showgirls and of the American zeitgeist fame and how they've dissolved in the modern day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a fascinating duality there to explore, because she has committed her whole life to this, and there have been deep consequences along the way, right? Specifically with her daughter, that is an estranged relationship. Her daughter doesn't even call her mom or anything. They're on a first name basis. That is an immediate giveaway.
Yeah.
But I do find the film very moving. There is a beauty to those ideas here that I do find intriguing. So despite the script and the dialogue and how weird it is at times, there is a tenderness to this film that I really do like. And you couple that with Dave Bautista, who was genuinely great. Really, really good. In another year where Best Supporting Actor wasn't so insanely contested, he would certainly be in the mix for me.
Yeah.
Either way, I do really love his performance here. And I'm going to simply pretend that Jamie Lee Curtis's Oscar was for this film instead, because it's a much more captivating performance.
It's more interesting. I will give you that. Yeah.
Yeah.
These performances save it. They really do.
They do. Yeah.
I know a lot of people have compared this movie to The Wrestler, the Darren Aronofsky film, and I think it's easy to see why. It even has a similar visual griminess that film had. This kind of like a dilapidated kind of feeling, this almost indie kind of, it almost feels handheld, very guerrilla style in a way. But like that film had a tightness to it. It felt like when the characters spoke, they weren't reading from a page. It felt natural. The actors are doing their best to make it seem like what's on the page is natural conversation. And I think they mostly succeed, but a lot of it does ultimately feel very scripted, which is why it does ultimately feel like a first draft and very on the nose and literal in its messaging, which isn't very much. It has a very interesting idea, but it's not delivering much beyond that. Really, the only reason to recommend this is the performances, especially Pamela Anderson. I think it is one of the best performances of the year. She really does save it. And Billy Lord has a few small moments here that I think are very tender and sweet and heartbreaking as well. Dave Bautista proving himself to be probably the best wrestler turned actor ever. So,
hands down.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not even close if you ask me.
No.
Really good here. Yeah, this is an actor showcase strictly. I think that's all it is.
I agree. No, it is an actor showcase. I will say, even though the script fundamentally is a bit underdeveloped, I do agree. But I do want to emphasize that I do think there is a beauty to that duality of
Okay.
a lost art in a world that is becoming more lascivious. At least that's how Shelley sees it.
I like that idea a lot.
I love that idea. And maybe it only works because of the performance. To your point, I'm willing to admit that. But I think there is a beauty to that here. I think that does come through well, especially in the performances, that I did feel this saddening sensibility. It is heartbreaking, especially with that catharsis at the end of the film with Shelley. It is an incredibly visceral moment. So, yeah, Pamela Anderson kills it. She's so good here. Remarkable.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely amazing in this movie.
Okay, so that is The Last Showgirl. Where should we go next? Do you want to talk Wallace and Gromit?
Yeah, let's change gears a little bit.
Change gears
a little wild,
bit?
something a little fun. Yeah.
A little Wallace and Gromit. So this is a film that is, I would venture a guess to say this will be the 5th film nominated at the Oscars for animated film. There's the big 3, and then Inside Out 2, and then probably this one.
I think that's the 5. Guess. I think that's the 5. Yeah.
I think that's the 5. So Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul, or as Brendan puts it,
Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning.
There you go. Yeah.
I knew you were setting me up for that. And I don't think I can take credit for that comparison. I was looking out for other critics out there who may have made that connection already. And I did find some. I actually found one on Letterboxd from Patrick Willems, who logged the film before I did. and said this would be a great companion piece with Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning.
Uh-huh.
So I'm glad I found that, because it's not an idea I want to take credit for. I feel like it has been said, but this is the exact same movie as Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. I say that facetiously, but I also don't say that facetiously. It literally is almost shot for shot the same ending climax, and the fact that it deals with AI as a threat, it's almost uncanny how similar these movies are. I think this is the better version of Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. You and I did not fully go for that film within the Mission Impossible franchise. I think this is maybe the better version of that. I certainly had a lot of fun with this one. I don't think it's perfect. I think it is certainly one of the better animated films of the year, but there are others I prefer, such as The Wild Robot and Memoir of a Snail and Flow, for instance. This could be number 4 or number 5 for me at this moment, primarily because I do like Wallace and Gromit in general. I do much prefer movies like The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. I think that's a much better movie. I like a lot of the shorts that they did together in the 80s and even 90s. This team, I think, has made better movies, like Chicken Run, for instance, I think is a better movie as well.
Sure.
I think where Vengeance Most Foul is at its most foul. Is I think the gnomes, the Nobots, whatever they're cleverly named, I do think they overstay their welcome a little bit, especially when I think Feathers McGraw is one of the best villains of the year, and I wish we got more of Feathers, honestly. So there might be a little bit of an imbalance there, but at times this is very funny. Gnome Improvements, the business that Wallace decides to start, is very clever, very funny. And I think overall the film is very fun and very funny in that regard. Just not the perfect balance in tone and comedy that I would have personally liked. But I do think it is very fun.
Yeah, I think it's a fine little animated film. I do really like the film. It is very funny. I agree. It is immensely charming and playful. I do like its commentary on technology and our reliance on it, such as we've seen with many movies in recent years. But this is certainly doing it in a really unique way that I do like. I don't think the film has the power or the depth as the year's best animated films. So this won't show up for me at the InSession Film Awards by any stretch of the imagination. I still think this would rank probably around 7 for me for the animated films I've seen this year. But I think it's good. Like it's certainly good, maybe a little slight, but you know, it's a harmless movie. It's really fun and enjoyable. You don't need 5 drinks. You don't have to be 5 drinks deep to enjoy this one. You can go in sober and enjoy it immensely.
What are your thoughts on Wallace and Gromit as a property? You've seen The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, right?
I have. Yeah.
Okay. And I think it sounded like you acknowledged during my thoughts there, you agree that's the better movie between the two.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's a really good movie, that one. I think this one's pretty good, though.
Yeah, I like that one a lot as well. I don't know. I probably grade them about the same, though, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Okay.
But I'm not blown away by those movies like a lot of other people are. Like I think they're fun. They're fun movies, but
yeah, they're not among my favorite animated characters, or if we ought to call this a franchise, given the short films they've done together as well. It's not my favorite string of animated stories, but I like them all. I think they're all very fun. The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, I think, is quite good. There's a charming quality to that one that I do love. But yeah, I
like the inventiveness of those films. Like they're really good animated adventure movies.
They're kind of Looney Tunes like in a way, with different animation style for sure, but also with more British humor, which I appreciate as well.
Yeah, for sure. I guess they're just generally a little bit more slight than what I tend to prefer.
Sure. Okay.
And I think, with animated films, like I think there's plenty that have more to offer in terms of depth and richness and, like how they can move me. But in terms of just simple cinematic adventures go, I mean, they're really effective in that regard.
Mhm.
And if that's all people want out of those films, then by all means, I mean, that's
Yeah,
probably
that's all
why
I need
they
out
are
of them.
beloved.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but that's, the difference for me on the whole. All right. So Wallace and Gromit likely nominated for an Oscar. I think that's where
Yep.
we're headed.
Coming to Netflix on January 3rd, I think.
Yeah. And again, like, I don't mean this as, again, I don't mean this disparagingly, but I do think it is a little disappointing that Wallace and Gromit, for as fun and charming as it is, that it's going to take that 5th spot over something like Transformers 1, which again, I think is one of those that it has more to it. I think there's more thematic depth there.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that. I graded both of these films the same, Transformers 1 and Wallace and Gromit on Letterboxd. So I don't know which one I like more. I know they're both kind of rounding out the space for my 5th nominee when it comes to the InSession Film Awards. So I'm not really sure. This is where it gets tricky, right? Because
So
I know
you
what.
might be significantly higher on this than I am then.
Oh, I am. I like this more than Inside Out 2. I'll tell you that right now. Inside Out 2 is not in my 5. That's not going to be in my 5 when it comes to the InSession Film Awards. That's already decided for me. I can name, I think, 6 animated films. Actually, I can name 7 animated films from this year I like more than Inside Out 2. And that's a film I still like. That's really, I guess, maybe the big difference there. So I don't know if this will end up in my 5, Wallace and Gromit specifically, but it's kind of teetering there.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I saw Inside Out 2 a second time, and I was pretty blown away. I think that film is like it's gonna win the popularity contest because of the box office, and that puts it on a pedestal for people to knock down. And I think in this case, unfairly, sometimes that is justified. In this case, I think it is pretty warranted. I think that one is easily in a 5 for me.
I need
it's
to
not
give it
even
a
close, especially
give it a
compared to something like Vengeance Most Foul. And again, I don't mean to sound disparagingly on this. I just find the film very slight comparatively. I think there's so much more meat on the bone with Inside Out 2.
I don't disagree with that. I just think Wallace and Gromit's the better movie. There are things about Inside Out 2 as a movie that I just found really frustrating. But I think the messaging is really compelling in that movie. I do need to give Inside Out 2 a second go. I know my wife wants to watch it, so I may have an excuse to queue that one up on Disney Plus at some point soon. Because I know, as you said, you liked it even more on
I did
a rewatch. So I might as well. I'm very curious about that. As it stands, it's just not quite there for me.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So my 5 are pretty solidified. There's might be one other film I have to catch up with, but it will have to do miracles because I think it's been an elite year for animation and like something like, again, Transformers 1, to go back to that, I think is head and heels above Vengeance Most Foul as well. And also like that there's a surprise factor to that film as well. Like most people on the planet, I don't think any of us went into that film expecting it to be anything given its marketing.
Yeah.
I was pretty blown away by it.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question, and this might seem like we're going a little bit far down a rabbit hole with regard to animated films in general in 2024. But when we get to our award show, we're not going to count animated short films in that category. At least I don't think we are we?
No, I've never done that.
Okay,
No.
the reason why I ask is because there is an animated short film on Disney Plus right now that is very, very good. I was almost tempted to include it. It's called An Almost Christmas Story, which I think you may have heard of. I'm not sure if you have. It's basically about an owl and a little girl who match up in New York City and try to help each other get home, is basically what it is. It is produced and presented by Alfonso Cuarón, and it is directed by David Lowery.
Of course, you got the David Lowery factor in there.
So it's like, when you hear that, it's like, I need to watch this, but it's only like 23 minutes long. So it's hard to qualify that, and we've never really qualified short films before, so I'm probably not going to
I never
include it.
have anyway.
Yeah. So but I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there that if there's anything that's going to make the year even more complicated with regard to animation, that's also part of it.
Gotcha. All right. Moving on from that, Is that all of them that we've crossed over on?
Well, there's
On
also
our list here.
Dahomey, the documentary Dahomey.
The documentary Dahomey. So, yeah, let's talk about that. That's Maddie Diop's latest in Dahomey. This one is also relatively short, right? This is 68 minutes.
Yeah.
So I think we could qualify it, but maybe just barely.
I think this is still a film. This is
It's
still
still
very
a
much
film.
a film.
It's still
I
a
mean,
film.
Heck,
No, it is.
If Bambi can still be a feature-length movie at
There
69
you go.
minutes, so I think this can as well.
It counts. Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you think about Dahomey?
And this depicts, the idea, not even just the idea, but these royal artifacts of Dahomey, a West African kingdom that are being taken by French colonists in the 19th century for collection and display in Paris, are now being moved back home in modern day Benin. So that's basically the backdrop of this. And it's, in a way, what's interesting about this movie is that it's a fascinating document about art from the perspective of the art, which is really, really intriguing. The almost demonic voiceover narration speaks to the objectification of great art whose historical relevancies are becoming dangerously lost to time. And then there's this political turmoil that ensues regarding who actually owns the right to preserve them. I think that's all very captivating. I love when documentaries can be artistic in their own right, especially one that is about the preservation of art itself and history with regard to that art. I think it's a very fascinating documentary, certainly one of the better ones of the year, and very inventive in its filmmaking, which we like to see documentaries like this do.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, I think this is a captivating little documentary. It is quite amazing what it's able to get away with in its runtime, its limited runtime, as we noted. But you're right, it provokes some stirring questions about art and repatriation and what does it mean for these people to have these statues, even if it's just 26 of them. Like, that is a stirring debate here. There's a rather lengthy sequence for a documentary that is 68 minutes, maybe a little overdone, because it is quite a lengthy debate, but it is a provocative one though.
It is.
The citizens of this country are talking about, is this enough? Is this enough? Because they only get 26 statues, I believe is the number, 26 or 28, something like that.
It's 26, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's I think they name like at least like 1,500 artifacts, known artifacts.
Did they say 7,000 or something
or
like
is it
that?
7,000? Maybe. Yeah. It might
I don't
be
know.
that.
I can't remember the exact figure. Either way, it's a lot more than 26.
It's a lot more than 26. So there is the debate of, is this good enough? I don't know if this is good enough. When there are 7,000 other artifacts out there, should we be celebrating just 26 of these items coming home? But on the other side of that coin, there's a lot of others arguing that this is a necessary first step, and this is important to bring these artifacts home.
Yeah.
I do find that quite fascinating to see that debate, how people react to those different arguments there. And at the center of it, to your point, there is this emphasis, this focus, this point of view rather, from the artifact itself.
Yeah.
And how they see themselves in the middle of all of this. And you couple that with the framing here, the very inventive filmmaking, and it is quite incredible how good this is for a short little documentary like this.
Yeah. I don't want to, I guess, categorize this movie as a tale of two halves, but I do think there are distinct halves here between the first act and then when we lead to the second act. The whole second half of this movie is really where that political debate ensues, right? I was admittedly more transfixed by the actual transferring process of this art, especially given how good of a job director Maddie Diop does in personifying the art. They feel like people, they feel like characters, and they feel like they are in pain given the fact that they are uncertain of their future and where they're going to end up. I think that's what makes the voiceover narration so strong and complementing that. But I was certainly more transfixed by that element of the film, which is not to say I wasn't transfixed by the debate that ensues in the back half. I do wonder if maybe that portion goes on a little bit too long, even though this is a very...
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's where it sounds like... Yeah, that's where I was going with that, because it sounds like we agree on that. And I wonder if, like, maybe I would have preferred this movie more had the balance been more emphasized on, you know, kind of the dreamy qualities of that first half.
Yeah, because it almost moves away from being a film and more so C-SPAN debate about
it becomes kind of a testimonial affair of sorts.
Yeah. And so look, again, the conversation itself is compelling. I was compelled by it. But again, I hate to funnel everything through this lens, but it's the end of December and it's on our minds all the time. But if I am to look at this through the lens of, okay, well, if anything keeps this off of my 5 for best documentary, it could be that. Because I do think it's a really good documentary. But I do think that debate, which again, in a 68-minute film, it is a pretty lengthy one. It's 20, 25 minutes at least of just characters getting, or not characters, real people getting on a mic and offering up their opinion on how they feel about these 26 pieces. Is the repatriation enough? I don't know. Maybe not. As compelling as the debate is, that's where the filmmaking kind of stops. So again, if it doesn't end up on my 5, it'll be because of that. But on its own, I would still highly encourage people to go and check it out, because it's still a really good documentary, and the debate itself is one worth having, and that's why it's here. That's why she wants to include it, because it is a fascinating debate where people are on both sides. They have compelling arguments, and you know, how do they land on that? And like it's interesting.
Yeah. I will agree with you that I think there are a few other documentaries that I found more impactful for me personally. I think you and I will both agree that perhaps the best documentary of the year so far, at least for us, is The Remarkable Life of Evelyn. That's probably my number 1 right now. I'm also a big fan of Sperm World. I thought that was a really interesting one as well. I definitely prefer those two.
I do have a different, I know this is going to sound crazy given our Eibelin review. I think I do have another number 1 that we'll probably talk about on next week's show.
Oh, I know which one that is. Yeah, I've yet to catch up with it. I'll get there.
Yeah. But Eibelin is... It's a 1B. I'll just put it that way. It's like a 1B. So it's like right there. We'll maybe talk more about that next week.
Yep, it's on the docket.
Though, still a good movie. I do encourage people to go and check that one out. All right, next on the list, I think that's all of them as far as crossover goes.
I think so. Yeah.
I think there's a few here individually we wanted to talk about. There was one on your list, I think.
There was an animated film on my list that I won't talk about too much because I'm sure you'll give it a go at some point, and it's only an hour long. It's available on Amazon Prime. It's called Look Back. It's from filmmaker Kiyotaka Oshiyama, rather, is the filmmaker's name, who I think is most known for what's it called? I forget the exact name of it, but this is a filmmaker I don't really know much about at all. But I thought this was a very effective, brief animated film, really about the manga artistic process. It's kind of a meta look at the creation of this type of art within a movie that is essentially this type of art, but deals with a pairing between two female friends who are very different from each other and emphasizes the partnership as an effective tool for great artistic making, right?
Okay.
And I do think it's a very inventive anime film. I think you'll enjoy it. I'm not sure to what extent. I don't know if it'll quite cross over into your 5 because it is a very brief movie, but it is a very affecting film given where it goes. But I think that briefness, the mere 58-minute runtime, actually adds a level of devastation when serious things start happening in the back end. It's very metaphysical. It plays with the form in very inventive ways. Very curious to see what you think about it, but it's if we consider 58 minutes a feature-length film, I feel like we're kind of splitting hairs at this point. If we were to, I'd probably consider this in my 5 for best animated film of the year, at least at this point. I'd have to do some more wrestling with that. I love the invention of it. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah. I have heard good things about it. It's certainly on my list. I have some others I want to prioritize, but we still have a few weeks. We have a few weeks, so I'm sure there'll be an opportunity for me to give that one a go before we get to our year-end awards.
Yeah.
I have a few here on my list as well that I'll quickly talk about. Supposedly the next Best Picture winner was going to be September 5. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
I feel like people forgot about that one now.
For a while, that was certainly the joke. Look, September 5th is a well-crafted political thriller. It is well made. I will give it that. It is the kind of movie that probably would have won an Oscar 30 years ago, if we're being honest. It is tense and thrilling. I think the performances are really good, especially John Magaro and Ben Chaplin, who are excellent in the film.
Okay.
However, this is a film, and I don't know if we talked about it here on the show or maybe we mentioned it offline. I can't really recall. So if we did talk about it here on the show, forgive the redundancy. But this is a film that presents itself as being journalistic and apolitical. However, that is a facade. Do not be fooled by its apolitical approach, because it makes choices that are political. It makes choices that are political, not just in terms of characters who are deeply affected by the events of this film, and those events being Palestinian individuals taking Jewish athletes hostage at the Olympics in what year was this? 1965? I don't know. I could be making that up. I can't remember the year.
I can't remember the year either. I'm sorry.
I'd have to look it up. I don't have that in front of me. But those are the events here. We've all seen Munich, so it is the events of Munich. So characters are witnessing these events in real time, right? And they are affected by it. And it's something that the film intently makes note of, very intently makes note of. But it also wants to denote that this is happening to Germany in a post-Holocaust world. Yet the film refuses to do anything meaningful with its political underbelly.
Okay.
Again, defiantly putting on the facade of journalism, but it becomes this hollow experience as a result because it just doesn't want to cross any sort of line. And I think by choosing to be standoffish in terms of its politics, when it does make choices that are inherently political, but not recognizing that, I don't know if that was intentional or unintentional, but the side effect of it to me is, I don't know, a little gross. Grossly miscalculated.
The way you were phrasing that, that's what I was going to ask you. If it was, similarly to something like Alex Garland's Civil War, which claimed to be apolitical, but makes choices that very much contradict that idea. I was going to ask if that seemed to be a deliberate choice with September 5, because you called it a facade. If that apolitical notion or that apolitical approach was a very deliberate facade, or if that just came off as kind of a miscalculation, like you said. I was curious what you meant by that, but it sounds like you're suggesting it was a miscalculation, something misguided.
I think it was a miscalculation because, dramatically speaking, a lot of the film is, hey, we are sports journalists we were never meant to cover this, but we're here. We're 100 feet from the building where this is happening. We're going to cover this. We're going to do this live on television. And it was one of the first of its kind. And I forget the numbers. They said. I mean, it was like
Yeah, that's
50, like 100 million people watched this in real
yeah,
time.
I haven't seen the
Something
movie.
crazy.
I haven't seen the movie, but what you're describing there is absolutely a political action. That is absolutely a political choice. I think we talked about this with Civil War, right? That refusing to pick a side is not the same thing as being apolitical, right? And in this case, maybe it's not about picking sides, but the fact that it's partaking in this, that's a political choice. That is not apolitical. So I get what you mean by that.
No, and to even further that, you have to remember the context of what's happening here, because they are labeling these individuals as terrorists. And I think that's even a conversation that is brought up at one point in the film. Like, what do we call these guys? Oh, let's call them a terrorist. And I think that was like, it was around that time where terrorists started to become a name in the zeitgeist, where people became familiar with that term.
Yeah.
And this film wants to infer that this is the first time it happened. And maybe that's true. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. I don't know.
But again, that's not apolitical.
I'm with you.
But again, that's why it's a bit of like, it presents itself as being, journalistic by, we're sports people, but this is happening in real time. So we're going to become journalists and we're going to cover this as journalists. But like, the choices it makes are political. And not only that, the characters react in horror to what they are seeing, and the film is intent on that, while offering no context as to why these things are happening. They don't give you any context as to why this is happening. Why would these individuals react the way they do? Now, okay, I understand that is a very loaded topic. That is a very loaded topic, and maybe you don't want to get into the history of Palestine and Israel, especially I don't know. I mean, there's a lot there, but not offering any context while choosing to be while your characters are revolted by what they're seeing, but then pretending like that's apolitical.
Yeah, it's
just not good.
I don't think that. Yeah,
good?
that's not the definition of apolitical, if you ask me. Like,
but that's how that's what the film thinks it's doing, though, and that's why it's like, it is a well-made political thriller, but beyond its craft, there's just a lot here that is not to be desired.
And I've heard a lot of middling reviews from this one from a lot of our friends in our circle, which is why it is one I hope to see before we get to our award show, but it's maybe not one I'm going to prioritize as much as some of these others, like foreign language films, for instance. Yeah. But yeah, I hope to catch up with it sometime soon. Yeah.
So, I don't know, I guess if you're one of those that wants to see it for awards purposes, because it could very much be in the fold,
maybe,
then I guess go ahead and check it out, and maybe depending on your political leanings, maybe you'll like it more than I did.
Okay.
Again, there's a lot there, and yes, but it just didn't. Like, the approach, the miscalculation of it did not work for me.
Gotcha. Okay, very interesting.
All right, and then I believe the last one on the list actually I got two more.
Okay.
The last one I can get through very quickly. I want to talk about the documentary? Question mark? My first film. So this is interesting. I don't really know how to wrap my mind around this one. So
I don't really know much about this one, if I'm being honest.
It is from Zaya Enger. This is one of the most fascinating films of the year. I have not wrestled with this as far as ranking goes or anything of that sort. However, this is about Zaya and the making of her first film when she was young, when she was in her, I think, early 20s, something to that effect.
Wow.
So it is a true story, and it presents itself as a documentary at the beginning and parts. However, the events, a lot of what unfolds, though, is a dramatic film. It is a dramatic film. I guess you could label it a recreation, but the film doesn't present it as a recreation. It presents it as a dramatic film with real performances that stars Odessa Young and as Anger herself. It is very meta at times. Without getting, I don't want to reveal too much, especially at the end. It gets real meta, like incredibly meta, and the filmmaking is experimental. It is utterly fascinating, which is why I understand. I mean, you want to talk about polarization. You look at this film on Letterboxd, and from review to review, it'll range from 0.5 star to 5 stars. Like it just,
I mean, that's my kind of movie. You know, that gets me excited.
Yeah. There's like, I understand why a lot of people do not like it. This has JD qualities written all over it. Cause it is reflective. It is poignant. And it's very self-critical. This is Zaya looking internally, looking at mistakes that she made, relationships that she ruined. Again, I don't want to give too much away, but in the making of the first film, there is something that something dire happens as a result of one of her artistic choices.
Okay.
And she wrestles with that. She has to wrestle with that here. Now, again, it's not someone on screen. It is Odessa Young as Zaya, essentially, in giving a dramatic performance with some meta qualities thrown in there. And there's some voiceover from Zaya talking about her experience. So she's never too far away from the material, too far away from what we're seeing on screen. So it's like we're always reminded that this is a pseudo documentary, even though what we're seeing feels like we're watching a movie. It's strange. It's a weird experience.
I don't know what you just described, but I know I want to watch it now. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, and I don't know. It might be one of those that'll be easier to talk about once you've seen it as well, and we can have some back and forth on it. But
yeah, we can just try and find the words to best articulate what this film is.
Yeah, I mean, especially because it gets quite meta at the end, and some of those meta choices are, again, unique. They're very unique.
Interesting.
Do they all work? I don't know, but I was moved by it. I loved it.
I mean, if you were moved by it, then I'd say it works.
Yeah. I really was moved by it. I think there's a lot here. Again, when you're looking back at, again, the choices you made when you were young, trying to find your identity as an artist, and again, Zaya doesn't shy away from a lot of those mistakes, and this is like, I guess simply this is acting as a form of redemption for her.
Okay.
And finding peace in the truth of what that experience was. And I don't know, like I found that poignant. I was moved by it.
Okay.
So
I mean, yeah, I don't know what you just described, but it sounds fascinating. That's
interesting.
That's how you sell a movie for me, at least.
So, yeah, if you get a chance to see it, maybe we'll talk more about it. But
all right,
yeah, it's fascinating. I really dug the experimental approach that the film had. So
okay, cool.
Okay, so that is my first film. That is a movie release. It might be streaming on Mubi right now, actually. So I think people can go and check that one out. And then lastly, I'll just note, I was able to see the Netflix film Carry On. This is maybe one of those like nice little end of the year surprises as well.
Apparently also known as John McClane enters a phone booth.
Yeah, that's how I would describe it. Like this is closer to phone booth than it is Die Hard. And I think that's what I found so fascinating about it is
Gotcha.
And I love Phone Booth. I've been vocal about that here on the show before.
Oh yeah, that movie's very underrated.
It's very, very good.
That was directed by Joe Schumacher. I think that might be his best movie. I think that might be his best movie.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Yeah. This is like a Christmas airport version of Phone Booth. I mean, now this is a little bit. Carry On is a little bit more absurd and action oriented, which is why Die Hard in a phone booth kind of makes sense. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. Like it knows that it's absurd. It knows that it's wild, but it just kind of leans into it. And
gotcha.
Yeah, Taron Egerton, man, he goes for it. He's having
this looks like fun.
Life.
This looks like fun. I haven't watched it yet, but I know my wife and her dad want to watch it, so we might watch that together this week as like a family movie outing if we get the chance.
Yeah, I think it's a great little time. I mean, there's nothing here that's going to shock and awe you. I mean, there's nothing surprising here. It's just, it's very meat and potatoes, knows what it is, and just goes for it. Just has a lot of fun.
Gotcha.
It's not interested in, like, there's not a serious bone in this film's body at all.
Honestly, it sounds like all the better for it, right?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think it knows exactly. Yeah, just it leans into its absurdity.
I like movies like that. We need those. We absolutely need those in our lives.
Absolutely. So I enjoyed it. All right, so those are the films that we have caught up on for this week. Next week, here is a list of films we're going to get into, and next week's going to be it's going to be a little heavy. This is going to be a lot to talk about on next week's show.
Yeah,
so we're going to do more catch up, and we are going to talk about the documentary No Other Land. We're going to talk about The Seed of the Sacred Fig, I'm Still Here, How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies, The Room Next Door, little Almodovar, Cillian Murphy and Small Things Like These, Andrea Arnold's Bird. We might get into The Fire Inside. If we have time, we'll get to Joshua Oppenheimer's The End. I'm very much looking forward to that. Maybe a little The Girl with the Needle. And again, if we can fit it in, a little Paul Schrader, because he has his new film, Oh Canada.
And I'm sure it's enough to spark a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot to get into next week as well.
I think this is going to be difficult because I feel like some of these movies are not going to be ones we'll want to only talk about for like 10 minutes.
Yeah. We'll see how next week goes. It might be a little long. Maybe we'll break it up into some bonus content.
I was going to say, maybe we can pick a few of them that we think better fit the bonus content platform. We can save them for that.
Yeah, we'll see, because there's some heavy hitters there that we'll definitely have to talk about. So
yeah,
we'll definitely see how it goes. But we'll do our best to get through all of those next week.
Yeah.
With that'll do it for this week's show. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, please leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, of course, subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, you can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. You can hit us up on social media as well. Reviews this week. We talked about Mufasa.
Yep.
And then we did a review for All We Imagine As Light. That was a really, really fun conversation. I urge people to go and check out.
Good movie.
Any final thoughts, Brennan? Did I forget anything?
This is our last official episode, if I'm not mistaken, before Christmas officially hits, right?
Before
so
Christmas,
guess,
yep.
Yeah, so I guess we should say Merry Sithmas, as my shirt says. It's bad Christmas sweater season. I had to wear it.
It is Christmas sweater season, that is for sure. We hope everyone has a great holiday. Be good to your family. Watch movies, whatever that may be. Could be Carry On, could be Die Hard, any of the Christmas classics. Who knows? Maybe you want to watch My First Film on Mubi.
That sounds like a Christmas classic right there.
Yeah. Whatever makes your heart happy. And I've been reading tweets of people like their families getting together to watch The Substance, which would be a wild experience.
Again, another Christmas tradition starting there.
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever it is, we hope everyone's having a great time watching good movies and eating a lot of food. It's a good time of year. All right, with all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast.